is a 1987 Ferrari 328, and this is a special car, bright red, wedge-shaped, analog, old-school exotic car. Today I am here with my friend Kennan, who is a bit of a Ferrari expert, and we're going to review it and show you all the quirks and features. Before we get started, big news, this Ferrari 328 is currently for sale, being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a classic old school Ferrari with a gated manual transmission mid-mounted V8 in the perfect colors, and it can be yours on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to head over to the live auction for this Ferrari, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, we're going to start the quirks and features, the 328, with a little overview of exactly what this vehicle is. So this was the entry-level mid-engine V8 Ferrari model throughout the 1980s. It came after the original 308 and right before the 348 in a lineage of mid-engine V8 Ferrari models that continues to this day with the Ferrari F8.
That's right. Now the 328 replaced the 308, which came out in 1977. And that car was offered with a variety of V8 engines, but it never made more than 240 horsepower. This car came out in 1985 and was offered with a larger 3.2-liter V8, which made 270 horsepower and 230 foot-pounds of torque.
Now, the 328 was sold all the way through 1989, and in the end, Ferrari made about 7,400 of these, of which just over 80% were GTS models with a targa top like this. The other 20% was a coupe that they called the 328 GTB. Now, back in '85, the sticker price of this car would have been around $60,000, which is a bargain. That translates to about 170 grand in today's money, a lot less than a brand new F8, which costs
250,000 or something?
250. So on to the quirks and features of the 328, starting with getting inside, where you have a rather small door handle. So small, in fact, that you can't get more than maybe a couple fingers in there in order to open the door, which is certainly weird. But they did that, I assume, for the purpose of trying to hide the door handle, make it a little bit less obvious, and instead you could focus on the beauty of this car, which sounds like it makes sense, except for the fact that the keyhole just sticks out here. Very large, very obvious, didn't go to the trouble of trying to hide that at all, even though you have this tiny little door handle next to it. But on the subject of opening things, certainly the weirdest open thing on the outside of this car is this black panel of side strakes has a keyhole at the end of it. You twist the key and open it up to discover, well, a window and also the gas cap for this car. And from there you can twist off the gas cap. Indeed, Ferrari managed to hide the fueling situation in this car behind this side strake. You'd never know it was there until it's opened up, and then you can start fueling. Now, when you twist off the gas cap, you'll notice there's this little rubber flap attached to it. You might be wondering, what's that? Well, the theory is that the flap prevents fuel, liquid, from dripping onto your precious paint in your beautiful Ferrari. If you happen to spill a couple of drops of gasoline on your rubber flap, you can just tilt it upwards, and then the fuel will go down the flap and into this little hole in the fuel door area, and it'll drain out, which is actually a pretty good idea. Less of a good idea is what's going on over on the other side of the car. You have another one of these black strake panels with a keyhole. This time you open it up and there's nothing behind it, only the window. They've done this for symmetry. On the driver's side, the keyhole is there to protect people from going in and stealing your fuel. On the passenger side, the keyhole is there to prevent people from going in and cleaning your window. Absolutely bizarre, but that's the 328.
Moving to the interior of the 328, the first thing you notice when you get in here is that it's all very analog. This is becoming a vintage car, and as a result, there are no modern touches in here, no swoopy design features. Everything is very angular and very of its time. All you have is a 3-spoke steering wheel and a gated manual transmission. Really looking at this car, it's incredibly focused and very simple. So when you look at the door panel, you notice there's no interior door handle to get out of this thing. So how do you? Well, it's obscured behind this grab handle itself. Kind of an odd place to put a release, but that's how you get out of the 328. One other thing you'll notice on the door panel is there is a little leather pocket which you can put a variety of things, and that's not the only place where there's storage in this car. To the left of the steering wheel you have a spot where you can put a wallet or maybe a cell phone, and then moving to the passenger footwell you notice there's a little leather flap in which you can put papers or something like that. But you'll notice that there's no glove box in this car. That's right, Ferrari didn't give you a glove box in this car, but they did give you a little consolation prize, and that's found here in the center console, where there's a little locking cubby where you can put your driving gloves. Staying focused on the center console, one of the big upgrades over the 308 was the switchgear that was used in here. Gone were the toggle switches of the more 1970s design 308, and in their place were these plastic switches which were more modern at the time. My favorite of those is the climate control buttons. Now you'll notice that in traditional form there's a cold and a hot button, and as you press the hot button, a little screen lights up with red bars showing you that it's getting hotter. But as you press the blue button, you're not adding blue bars to this. What actually happens is you take away red bars. So I suppose cold is the absence of heat, and Ferrari didn't have the ability to show blue bars, so they just took away the red ones. Moving to the rest of the buttons on the interior, they're relatively conventional, but there is one that stands out, and that's for the radio antenna. That's right, this car has an aerial, and to get better reception of your radio, you need to manually press the button to raise and lower it. Kind of an odd quirk, but that was Ferrari in the 1980s. Moving further up the center console, there's an array of dials to adjust the climate control, but front and center, in true Ferrari fashion, there's a gigantic ashtray because, of course, this was the 1980s, and what else would you want to do but smoke in your Ferrari? Located next to the ashtray is the gear lever for this Ferrari's obligatory gated manual transmission. Now what's unique about this one, as with all V8 Ferraris of the year, is that it's a dogleg manual. What that means is that first gear is over and down. Now reverse is where first normally would be, but to make sure that you don't accidentally go into it as you're rowing through the gears, Ferrari actually added a lockout. You have to push the gear lever down and away, and that will allow you to go into reverse. And next up, we take a look at the gauge cluster in this car, which was a departure from that was in the 308. Ferrari updated this by giving it a more of its time look, but also changing the color to orange to really drive home the modern 80s look. Looking further at the gauge cluster, you notice that all of the warning lights have their own individual lights, and my favorite of all of them is the slow down light. Now this comes on when the cats get too hot in this car and the car detects that you're driving a little bit too vigorously, and it asks you very politely to just slow it down a little bit. Another unusual quirk in this area is that there are two stalks located on the left of the steering wheel. One is to control the turn signals, and the other is to control the headlights. So when you're going for the turn signals, you might reach too far and hit the headlight controls. Kind of an odd problem to have in your 328. And next up in the interior would be the parking brake. Now, in a lot of Ferraris and exotic cars of this time, they had what's called a flyaway handbrake. And what that means is you pull the handbrake up and then the brake is engaged, but the lever's in your way to get in and out of the car. As a result, what you need to do is push it back down again. So Ferrari actually allows there to be slack in it so you can push the handle back down and get in and out more easily. When it's time to let the handbrake go, you pull the lever all the way up, press in the button, and slide it back down again, and now the handbrake is released. Another quirk of the Ferrari 328, like with all Ferraris of its era, of course, is the glorious Italian horn that's activated by pressing the Ferrari logo in the middle of the steering wheel. It's high-pitched and absolutely ridiculous, so take a listen. The next quirk to talk about with this car, of course, is that it's from the 1980s, so that means it has pop-up headlights. That's right, this car's lights go up and they go down. The control for that is located to the left of the steering wheel, and you activate it by twisting it and the lights go up, and then you can see everything that's in front of you as you motor along in your 328. Once you've had enough of seeing those things, you can then twist the stalk back the other way. The lights go back down to retain this car's elegant aerodynamic shape. And next up, you might notice that it's a little bit tight in this car. I'm 6 feet tall and frankly, I don't have a lot of headroom. Fortunately, the roof comes off.
Now, the interesting thing about the roof is that once you remove it, you actually have a place in the car where you can put it, and that place is directly behind the seats. As you can see, the roof panel fits in to that spot, and then you can drive around with your roof, which is actually a nice little dose of practicality for this car. In fact, Ferrari has a couple of clever little practical touches that you wouldn't expect from the 328. One is this front compartment. To open it up, there's a little silver handle here in the front part of the driver's door jamb. You pull on that handle, that releases the front compartment, then you come up here, lift it up, and see the spare tire. This is a storage compartment, but it's mostly taken up by this spare tire, and frankly, it's a very cool spare tire. The original to this car, it actually says Ferrari 328 on one of the spokes, which is very cool, but it's also kind of old. Not sure if you'd really want to use it. Check the date code. It says 2186, meaning it was made in 1986, just like this car, the original spare tire. Of course, nobody really uses a spare in a Ferrari, but it's a cool memento to see, and a decent sized storage compartment up front. And next up, we move to the back of the 328, where you have the other opening compartment, the rear, which is opened with another silver latch in the driver's door jamb. This time on the back side, you pull that, this pops open, lift it, and discover the engine. This is where the V8 lives. Although it's a fairly small V8, only 3.2 liters. That was bigger than the 3-liter V8 in the Ferrari 308 that came before, but still a small engine, and it only made 270 horsepower and 230 pound-feet of torque. Again, this was an improvement over the 308. Not huge numbers by modern standards, but this car only weighs about 2,800 pounds, so it wasn't a lot of weight that this engine had to move around. Now, the 328, like all V8 powered Ferraris from this era, uses a variation of Ferrari's Dino V8 engine. That's what they called it. That was the code name, and this powertrain was in basically every Ferrari for decades, from the 1960s, 70s, all the way through the Ferrari 360, used some variant of this powertrain, including the 328. Now, one interesting thing about this car, like I mentioned, it has more power than the 308 and a larger engine, and it was notably more reliable. The 328's powertrain is generally regarded as more reliable, more user-friendly, easier to work on, fix than what you had in the 308. So this car, more power and more reliability, which has made it a more desirable car in the enthusiast market. The other interesting thing in the engine compartment area is this black leather panel back here. This is cargo storage. You unzip it, and then you have a cargo storage compartment that shares the rear with the engine in the 328. And yes, it's enclosed by zippers. That's actually how it works. That's how it's designed to work. You zip it open and closed, unlike what you'd find in basically any other cargo compartment in any other car. Now, within this compartment, you have the toolkit for the 328, which has, well, some tools, as you can see, but more interestingly, the bulbs. This car came with replacement bulbs, just in case you're driving along and you realize that your turn signal or your brake light is out. Well, you can change them on the side of the road if you wanted to, which is something I suspect most modern Ferrari owners wouldn't do, partially because the LEDs. Now, speaking of the bulbs, one other interesting item back here is the license plate lights, which are actually mounted on the engine cover. You can see them here with the cover up. They're just lighting up nothing, but when the engine cover is closed, they actually light up the license plate and do their job. It's just interesting to see them go away when you open up this rear compartment.
Moving to the exterior of the 328, it is of course this beautiful wedge shape that built on the 308. Now when the 328 came out, the 308 had already been in production for about 10 years, so it was time for Ferrari to enhance and modernize the look. To modernize the look, Ferrari decided to revise the front end of this car. They did this by changing the front bumper, adding a chrome grille in the middle with the little prancing horse, and they also added 2 giant fog lights on either side of the grille to give you even more light as you drive down the road. Some other differences on the front end would be that they smoothed out the fenders in general. They removed the slats that were behind the headlights and instead gave it this simple full, very clean, modern look. Some of the other areas that Ferrari decided to update included the wheels, which got slightly larger and a slightly different design to match the rest of the car. Moving further down the car, they also decided to change the rear of this car, which makes a tremendous difference. On the 308, there's a large black box around the exhaust, which looks kind of controversial, but on this car, everything has been smoothed out and you just have the simple rear bumper with 4 exhaust pipes, and it gives the rear end of this car a much more modern look. Now, Doug already mentioned that the powertrain is larger, but in addition to these cosmetic updates, Ferrari made some mechanical ones as well. They added the steering rack from the 288 GTO to give it even tighter, better steering. They revised the suspension and a number of things that added up to reportedly over 1,000 changes between the 308 and the 328.
All right, time to drive the 328. You ready?
I'm so ready.
Kennan has a Ferrari. He's got a 355.
Yeah, very, very different car to this. Like, being in this car, honestly, it feels even more vintage than the 355.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The 355 is not that much newer than this. Yours is, I mean, this ended in '89. Your 355 came out in '95, right?
Right, exactly. And this car has like a lot of stuff. 355. The 355 added a lot of stuff this car doesn't have.
Yeah.
So 355 has power steering, for instance, traction control.
Don't you think though the most obvious instant difference is the size in here?
It's ridiculous. I don't know if it picks it up well, but we are tight.
We are tight. My legs are tight. The pedal box is tight. This is a little car, and I think that's because the genesis of this design is the 308.
Right, it was a 70s car.
70s car where they didn't care at all. But that's kind of part of the charm. That's one of the reasons that people like vintage Ferraris, is because they have some of these weird foibles.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's an experience. Like, it's all, the sound is wonderful.
Oh.
You're click-clacking through a gated manual.
The gated V8. And you know what? I kind of was making fun of the power in this video earlier, saying it's not all that fast. I don't know. Here's 4,000 RPM flooring it. It's not really fast, but it's not slow, and the sensation of speed is wonderful.
Oh, it's so big in this car. The other thing that blows me away is like, it rides like shockingly comfortably.
Yeah, it rides okay.
Cars are so they're so rigid.
Yeah.
But this car is just like, it's kind of got a little give here and there. It's really nice. Like,
it's definitely not as rigid. Now the drawback is handling probably isn't as good, but steering is. Right. Because I have old school manual steering.
An interesting thing about that, that's actually the same steering rack that's in the 288 GTO. That was one of the mechanical.
That was one of the changes. This is the 288 GTO steering rack. Of course, at the time, a 288 GTO was only 30 grand more.
Right, exactly. Imagine making that decision these days with, looking to the future, but.
Yeah, $4 million versus this car, it would have been nice. Woo!
But the thing is, like, for a lot of people, this delivers the Ferrari driving
This is a Ferrari. This is what a Ferrari is. It's like kind of stupid, kind of compromised, but like fun and cool and eager, and it sounds good, and like.
And it looks amazing.
It looks awesome. Like, this is cool. And this is like the analog feel that so many people talk about later cars kind of missing out on.
Well, here's a question for you. So all the controls are very heavy. It's like, that's the thing that stands out to me the most.
Yeah.
Once you're moving, it's fine.
Yeah.
But like steering, very heavy. Clutch
is heavy. Clutch is heavy. It's a little V8, isn't it? It doesn't have like a big rumble to it.
No, it just wants to spin like all the time. It just really likes to be revved.
But yeah, stuff is heavy, but I don't know. To me, that's always been kind of the fun of these cars.
Agreed.
I've always liked driving. If I'm going to drive an analog car, I want to drive an analog car.
Well, I've heard so many, it's a cliche, and I've heard so many journalists say it, but it's like, it's got a go-kart-esque.
This car kind of does. It's little,
it really does.
And because the steering is so direct, it's manual steering. So at a stop, you might as well just get out there and physically turn the wheel.
It's like turning like that brake thing on like a train, like on a train.
Right.
Like you just
That's exactly. But when you're moving, it lightens up and it feels just fine.
Right. It communicates so well.
Easy clutch. It's heavy.
Progressive,
but it's like pretty easy to figure out. You know exactly where it is. There's no like stupid kick to it. I would almost prefer heavy to like vague.
Absolutely. All of these things come together, and that's why it's so unique.
And you're right, it does feel go-karty. It's so little and so
darty.
Woo! It's so darty. It's so darty.
We're just driving on normal roads in San Diego, and it's incredible how much room you have on either side of the lane.
Oh, I know.
Because the car is so narrow.
It's just little. 2,800 pounds, feels small, it is small, it looks small, it drives small. This is the old days. It doesn't quite have the presence of a Countach or a Testarossa, but it's so much more manageable and tossable and like throw around excitingable than those cars.
I think it's just, and again, it comes back to the reason why people really love them. It's just they're usable.
Yeah.
You could genuinely use this car with frequency. It's relatively, it's reliable. It's an exotic car.
And it's reliable. Yeah, that's a point that is not, we didn't really cover it much in the video, but it's not to be trifled over. No. 308s have some more issues than 348, which came next, and 355.
355, yeah. As a 355 owner, I can attest. I'm envious of 328 owners and their
This car
reliability.
is much more reliable. Not as fast, but that's a trade-off a lot of people are willing to make, especially because you get the wedge.
Right.
Even just a few years ago, these were 60K cars, if that.
Right. And even so, like, it deserves to. It's still culturally instantly recognizable as a Ferrari. You don't have to explain. It's not like a DeLorean where you got to have the same conversation. It's like...
And it's manual and analog, the feel that you're looking for without spending a zillion dollars.
It's a really compelling package. Like, it offers a lot, and yeah, I can see why people
It's cool. It's just plain cool. And it's fun.
Yeah.
It is actually fun, not just like, oh, I'm driving a Ferrari. Like, the actual driving experience is fun, not just like the brand name.
Exactly. It's special. Very special.
And so that's the Ferrari 328 GTS with Doug
and Kennan. This is a cool car that checks all the cool car boxes. It's a V8 mid-engined, bright red sports car with a gated manual transmission.
And you can buy it on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this 328 GTS a DougScore. And the DougScore is here. The Ferrari 328 GTS gets a 50 out of 100, which places it here against some similar vehicles from its era. The 328 score is actually pretty high, mostly because it's just a lot better as an all-rounder than a lot of 1970s and 80s exotics. The 328 is more reliable than the Ferrari Boxer of the 1970s and the Lamborghini Jalpa of the 80s, but it's also more exciting than a Porsche 944 Turbo or a Maserati Biturbo. For that reason, I've always felt the 328 is a little underrated. It's fun to drive, relatively reliable, very cool to look at, and surprisingly quick, and I'm happy I finally reviewed one with Kennan.